Okay, I think we can get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for the parallel session on automation and fact-checking, and thank you for making the difficult choice of choosing us with the interesting parallel sessions that are happening right now. My name is Damiano Spina. I'm a senior lecturer and DECRA fellow at RMIT University and associate investigator at the center. And I would like to start acknowledging country. We are gathering in the stolen lands of the Gadigal people of the Yuran nation. I would like to pay my respects to their ancestors and elders, past, present, and emerging, and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today face-to-face or also virtually on Zoom. I think I wouldn't do as a good job as setting the theme of the session today as Uncle Michael West did at the Welcome to Country. He did show the importance of debunking misinformation and how different communities are targeted with misinformation and the variety and the complexity of the problem. He also did a little exercise of pre-banking with us and prompting us to try to search for information and educating ourselves on how to find and verify information. So pretty much that's the theme of today. And what we are going to discuss together is how current research and current projects and that we are doing in the center, and also practitioners that are collaborating with us and we have here today, and see how we look at the context of assisting experts and practitioners with information access tools and data science and AI, and how we understand that connection of communicative AI that we had before that we just listened to in the context of fact-checking. So it's a pleasure to me to introduce you to this diverse and fantastic, rich lineup that we have today. We got next to me Danula Hettiachchi, who is a research fellow at ADM+S and also from the School of Computing Technologies at RMIT. And next to him is Kruger, who is the director of the CrossCheck division at RMIT FactLab and also an associate director of RMIT FactLab. Then we have Devi Mallal, founding member and media and research lead at RMIT ABC FactCheck, and also who is one of the partner organizations of ADM+S and associate director of RMIT FactLab. And then we have Michelle Riedlinger, chief investigator at the Digital Media Research Center at QUT, and an affiliate investigator of ADM+S. So I would like to start by trying to ask Devi to set the theme a bit and asking, like, how can machines and experts work together or are working together in the context of debunking misinformation? So let me change the slides here.
So I might just start by giving you a brief history of FactCheck for people who aren't aware of who we are. So we were originally established in 2013. Can you hear me okay? It's a bit reverby. At the ABC in 2013. And our original remit was quite defined, and that was to check the accuracy of claims made by politicians, advocacy groups, and other people in the public arena. Since that time, so we moved to RMIT University, a collaboration with them in 2017, and that actually opened up a huge opportunity for us to start to explore education, technology, and academic research, and which is how I met Damiano. So since that time, for those last 10 years, we've actually been using predominantly manual methods of fact-checking, and we've really honed those techniques. So part of being at RMIT facilitated us working with collaborations with other industry partners, and also allowed us to accept funding in ways that working at the ABC didn't. And so that has actually allowed us to start to investigate how to use automated tools in our workflows. So we've recently run 2 projects. One was the Mosaic project, which ran in the last federal election, which was a collaboration between us and the Judith Neilson Institute for Journalism and Ideas, which is now sadly defunct. And it was a collaboration with us and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, who are a European-based group, and Chasm Technology. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that project in a second. And our current project is around the Voice to Parliament referendum, where we've been funded largely by ADM+S and 2 of RMIT's enabling capability platforms, and to work with Full Fact, who is our English counterpart, who have developed their own suite of automated fact-checking tools. So I'll just give you a quick tour. This is the interface of Chasm Beam technology that we used during the last federal election. And it's very complex, and it's really geared towards harm reduction. So it's geared towards the graphs alerting you to particular narratives that are gaining speed, and that's meant to give you an indication of which narratives you should jump on to debunk at a certain amount of time. But it's a very complex interface, and we actually needed the help of their data scientists to actually decode what was going on for us. Oh, okay, sure. Okay. And so the next, do you want to flick to the next slide? This is Full Fact AI. This is the tool that we've most recently been onboarding our teams with. This is quite different. Again, it's been developed by fact checkers for fact checkers. And what it does is we have watch lists which contain social media addresses for politicians, political parties, lobby groups. We also have RSS feeds from news or different sort of news, online news services. And it can also monitor TV and radio transcripts. So that's hundreds and hundreds of hours of what would otherwise be like manual monitoring that this machine can potentially do for us. And then it surfaces claims, and then you can filter further from there. So these are our 2 initial kind of steps into the automated fact checking.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Devi. So it looks like these are solutions or tools that help you to, in the process of verifying misinformation, in the process of fact-checking and debunking. Was wondering, Anne, if you can tell us a bit more about other ways that we have to equip people on the process of verifying information in the context of pre-bunking.
Okay, thanks. Yes, pre-bunking. So I want you to think about what would be a wedge issue for you. And by wedge issue, something a bit sensitive from that. Something where you might be the one that you got holding, that one. Okay. Oh, that sounds better. Right. So pre-bunking. Think about a wedge issue. Think about an issue that you might be vulnerable about. Think about something that people could disparage you about, whether it's in terms of, something racist or some other prejudice or just ignorance. And just have a little think about how you could be vulnerable. That's your wedge issue, how things could be confused if the proper information is not out there. Everyone's got them. Every organization has got them. So if I was going to train, say, the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, to think about misinformation and disinformation, how would we go about it? So Uncle Michael West this morning was fantastic in that he set this up for us when it came to the different conspiracy theories that we've seen. So if it was the Red Cross, you think about all those issues of blood and donations and how it can be used to control people and that sort of thing. How are we vulnerable? How is that organization vulnerable there? What if it's a local council and there's been flooding? How are they vulnerable? Because sometimes whole suburbs actually need to be moved. And, I actually know quite close to near where I grew up, there is a whole township that has actually moved in Gatton in Queensland because of flooding. But think about how the council, might be vulnerable and under attack from, different conspiracy theorists or different activists and things like that. So when we think about pre-bunking, we know so much already, right? So we know there's these issues, we know there's these vulnerabilities, we know there are ideologies that really want to prove something, they want to retain their power, whether it just be a financial means, whether it might be just, their power because that's their ideology, or they just want to create mischief. So we've got a lot of information already. Think about the communities that you're a part of and what's the information that you need. And are you getting the information that you need? So that's where we come in with pre-bunking, and we think about, well, rather than wait for the misinformation to go viral and need to debunk it, let's get ahead of it. Let's get ahead of this curve. And that's what we're doing at the moment with the Voice referendum. So we're focusing very much on to begin with the stuff that we know. We wrote a pre-bunking live list and we've shared that with our media partners. And, you know what's going to be the wedge issues, right, for the Voice. So far we've seen a lot of misleading memes and social media commentary that claim that the Voice to Parliament could overturn decisions of government via the High Court, but they've got no legal basis. So that's kind of, I would actually class that more as a way of causing confusion as well. So we're not necessarily providing information to make things, or we need to provide the information, right, to make things clear for people. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of those sorts of claims that will just try to confuse them. Oh, sorry, I haven't kept up with my slides. That's okay. We can probably flip to, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And then, so Esther Chan, our Bureau editor, has written 7 common confusions about the Voice to Parliament and racial equality in Australia, because it's like, not everything can be sort of debunked as a fact check. There's nuances and you've got to explain, and you've got to, we all know the history, right? And we can all see why, for some things there can be a grain of truth that people remember. So let's write an article about it. So by grain of truth, the best example I can think of is in Samoa when they had that measles outbreak, right? How did that happen? Was that just because everyone said, no, we don't want to get a vaccine? What actually happened was early on, there was human error, and it was tragic to begin with. So people actually had a reason not to trust authorities and government, but then it was sorted out. But unfortunately, it was sorted out, and it was sorted out too late, and the misinformation spread, and the people who were selling vitamins and making quite a lot of money on it were able to spread their messages. So one tragedy led to another, and it was, basically snowballed from there. So we're also, looking at, the 7 different myths. The Voice to Parliament is racially divisive. Okay, it's a really easy one, I think, for certain personalities to throw out there and say, oh, it's, dividing us by race. That's something that needs a bit more context when it comes to, an explanation. So what we're doing with this current project with the Voice to Parliament is we have, oops, there goes the phone. We have what we call CrossCheck, which is a digital hub where we've got a lot of different journalists that are in this, it's a Slack group, and we're providing, and we're ramping it up, we're about to ramp it up again. We've done this before for elections, and we monitor all the misinformation, disinformation. We've done it manually, like apparently we're pioneers in the OSINT techniques, but we're loving being able to bring on and use more technology. And we share this with our media partners. We provide it for free, and we've just signed an MOU with SBS and NITV. We've had great, just collegiate relationships with the ABC, with Crikey, with The Guardian, and other community media and underrepresented groups as well. So we're going about and we're sharing the information that we see so that they can do explainers for their community, get ahead of this And also we're monitoring a tip line where members of the public are sending in emails to us, and constantly I'm seeing these same themes. It might be asked in a different way. It might be, oh, today's, person said it this way, but there's still a theme around racism, around, oh, the High Court, around certain different things that they'll see online or even in their letterboxes. So we've got to get ahead of this rather than the whack-a-mole of here's a debunk and a fact check. Let's get at that bit more explainer education, and you can't just do it 6 months ago. You got to keep at it. And yeah, as Michael West said this morning, and I wrote it down, he said, if you don't know, go out and find the facts. Right, well, we've got to make sure that we've filled that void of information when people are searching with things that, the information that people can find and find easily.
Thanks, Anne. Before at the beginning of the day, in the line of the coffee, I had a chat with Daniel Featherstone, that is working on the going out to indigenous communities and understanding how the digital inclusion, but also like understanding how the information that they get, So, and then in the context of the Voice to Parliament or in COVID and so on. So if there is no television and the only thing you have is WhatsApp or social media, and the only information that you get is misinformation and those narratives. So again, like the void of not having the actual, it's very hard to make an informed decision because you don't have that information doesn't get to those communities, and I think it's something that I see in common in debunking and pre-banking is like in that process, at some point, it's a communication process, So at the end, you need to be clearly communicate information to the end users or the end those that receive the information. And in that context, I wanted to ask Danula about what is happening there in that final step of going, once you have the fact check content or the verified content, how do you share that? And there's something we can do in the context of ADM+S in that particular step.
Thanks, Damiano. So if we talk about the fact-checking life cycle, there are so many stages where AI tools and technology can add value and assist professional fact-checking organizations. So think about preliminary stages where you try to find which claims that you want to fact check. So finding check-worthy claims, there are good technical solutions that can help in that stage. And then when you're actually trying to fact check a particular article, you can think about automated fact-checking approaches that can provide a verdict and then also a potential explanation that can again help fact-checking organizations in their process. But often there is a part of this life cycle which has not really caught the attention of the researchers, that is the presentation stage. So once you create the fact-checking article, you want to make sure that it's effectively presented to different audiences. So in this particular project, we are paying a little attention on this presentation aspect. And as you can see, some of the researchers who are involved in this project are also in this audience. And we had some collaborations with RMIT ABC Fact Check when we are doing this work as well. So we started thinking about how can we understand this problem and then try to provide technical solutions. To understand this problem, we took a mixed method approach, and we started bringing together practitioners, so fact-checking professionals and communications experts and researchers together in a workshop setup. And when we asked about, so what are the different elements that are there in fact-checking articles that are important in conveying these verdicts to the general public? So the first stage, as you can see here, is looking at different fact-checking articles and then trying to identify different elements. So these can be veracity indicators that are graphical elements that directly conveys the verdict, or the structure of the report, or details about the author, credentials of the organization. So there are so many different elements that can be incorporated in this final report. So as an exercise, we asked these professionals, communication experts and researchers to identify the importance of these different elements. So the motivation was, once you identify these different elements and their importance, how can you put them together to create more effective presentation strategies? So we did this workshop and we asked our participants to play with Lego blocks. That was a fun activity, but very informative. So if you look at our outcomes, so we analyzed the responses provided by our participants, and in the next stage, we synthesized our outcomes. So based on 3 aspects. So mainly, how can we create an effective structure? So this includes providing a graphical element or an element that directly conveys the final verdict to the user. So we found that this was an important part of a fact-checking report. And then also providing a clear structure so that the users can navigate this report. And as you can see, how you can implement these particular changes differs depending on whether you're presenting these reports through screens, which is the typical way that we consume fact-checking reports. But we were also thinking about other channels such as voice assistants or podcast, which are kind of looking forward in how we can create more effective fact-checking presentation. And so mainly we were looking at the structure and then establishing the trust towards the verdict. So this is how you can present the credentials of the organization, and then how you can present details about the author to establish that trust. And then the third aspect was personalization. So we created a bunch of personas based on the Australian Digital Inclusion Index. And then we asked participants, if you're creating an effective fact-checking presentation for this particular group or for this particular person, how would you make it different, right? And then we uncovered, based on the time availability, based on the technical proficiency, how people understand these fact-checking reports could differ, right? Now, after coming through these findings, we wanted to validate them with an online experiment. So we created a crowdsourcing experiment where we generated different types of presentations. And through a within subject experiment, we collected responses from 76 evaluators or participants. And then we found out that both credibility and presentation improvements could lead to increases, actually significant increases in how people accurately interpret this report. So it's very useful for participants to accurately find the final verdict of a report if you're making these presentation and credibility improvements. We also collected other attributes such as belief in science, conspiracy mentality, and demographic attributes. And we have some interesting findings that we can potentially share once this paper is available. But all in all, this was an interesting exercise for us because we are looking forward to the next stages where we can implement these changes in other channels such as voice assistants and podcasts and see how people react in these cases. And then this also ties in nicely with some of the other projects that we are doing where we try to quantify the biases that people have so that you can adjust these presentations to kind of mitigate those biases that different people have. And I think, so Kai-Shin, for example, is doing some interesting work in this space as well. So if you're interested, please chat to her as well.
There is a poster. I can recognize the poster of Kai-Shin because there is the Inspector Gadget there. Yeah, I have to say this is the work that we did in this project in the quantifying and measuring bias and engagement is the type of project that me as a computer scientist or Danula as computer scientist, we wouldn't never, or it's very hard to come up with the methodology or using Lego blocks to try to fight misinformation. And it was really like a good cross-disciplinary collaboration with our colleagues at ADM+S, Jenny Kennedy and Anthony McCosker, who help us to really have both qualitative and then feeding that to a quantitative methodology that is using our expertise in crowdsourcing. And that process ended up with some valuable outcomes that we hope that we can share with the practitioners, and they say, well, actually, yes, there is these little signals that are statistically significant, showing differences that can help us to better understand how to not necessarily personalize, but making sure that we consider who is going to read or listen to the verified content. We've been talking about like mainly what's going on here down under, but I was curious to hear about what happened in other parts of the world in the context of the use of fact-checking, the use of tools in the context of fact-checking. And I know that Michelle and together with Sylvia has a really cool project on that. So I wanted to hear more about that project.
Should I try this one? Good choice. Okay. So we're still in the process of collecting our data. We've done a lot of desktop research on around 20 organisations, and here's our exciting team. Most of us met at Global Fact 10 along with Devi, which was a lot of fun. And yeah, if you go to the next slide, we're interested in Meta third-party fact-checking. And for those who you don't know, fact checkers are contracted by Meta to, flag content, problematic content, which can then be downgraded in terms of amplification or even removed, and they're given access to tools. So we're really interested in this because I think it was really surprising at Global Fact 10 how much money is being now pumped in from the platforms and being used for a lot of innovation. So it is a pretty exciting space, but it's sort of traditionally been a bit of the down end of town, political fact checking. I think Vivka said, we're fact checking everyone now, but that isn't necessarily how it was in the past. So this is really I think Lucas Graves calls this getting shit off the internet. This is just get that off the internet. So that's what we've been interested in, and post-COVID practices around innovation. So yeah, if you just go to the next slide, these are the areas we're focusing on, and we've spent a lot of time in Latin American fact-checking groups and some in Africa, and we got a long way to go. So you guys are talking about Australia, but it's been wonderful having chats and finding out some of the differences. But yeah, these organisations are really innovating. And if you go to the next slide, I can tell you about some of the areas where that's happening. So platform practices, a lot of them are now working with TikTok in a very different kind of program. But in terms of just getting this stuff off the internet, conducting really sophisticated, coordinated network analyses. So understanding, who's out there in terms of sock puppet accounts, where this misinformation content's coming from. So they're not just, I suppose, working at the post level, but thinking about the production of this work. And I think that's happening in a lot of places as well. But they've got the really specific regional watch lists and the tools to be able to make that happen. That a lot of them are developing it in-house because US-based, language-based, English, it can be really problematic. Using AI and NLP for those large-scale media and social media monitoring and mapping those landscapes. So really getting they're things that I've talked with you guys about as well, but it's really interesting seeing those local flavors and the history that what seems like, and you talked about this, Damiano, what seems like misinformation or disinformation in one context may not be in another, and it's very subtle. And also undertaking these economic analyses, so really getting a sense of identifying the revenue models for toxic content. So spending a lot more time in advertising, seeing lots of nodding. So yeah, because a lot of these environments, I suppose, are politically, they can be destabilized. We started looking at COVID and there wasn't, I don't think, a country that didn't have an election during that time. So it was very hard to avoid political fact checking and then the spreading of that content. If you go to the next slide, we're also looking at the tools that fact checkers are using in these areas. And we've been trying to think through how to categorize, I suppose, these tools. But one thing you notice is, the variety. So I wanted to talk a bit about archiving, because that was big at the conference, but also for our fact checkers. So there's Latin American databases now, and we just had a chat earlier about that. And these are databases that aren't publicly available. They're for fact checkers to see how content's spreading. And so we're seeing a lot of regional relationships being formed in particular issues, but also across time, that fact checkers can draw on, and they're hungry for automation processes, because, for example, with TikTok now, you can have a 10-minute video. What that means for fact checking all that content, having automated processes to be able to identify the narratives that have already been captured and find those again is really important. And will save a lot of time. So thinking about how I break them up, there's the tools that the platform provides, but then there's also off-the-shelf products that they're trying to use from marketing and branding. So, mechanisms. So nothing's perfect, and not one tool will work. There's also fit-for-purpose technologies, some of the ones that Devi has talked about, but Osfatos in Brazil, they've developed a whole system of channels to be able to monitor through their own tools. And I think there's some excitement for these groups to be able to share that with other fact checkers for development purposes, but also revenue generation. So trying to find ways, because I think every fact checker we talked to has said, we need more bodies. We don't need more technologies. We need more people who understand the journalistic investigative practices that we do and can support it. Tools are good too. So data sources, more API access, obviously. There's other ways I can talk about cutting those technologies, but those in-vid and video identification. So tools that are exclusive for fact checkers, because tools are weapons for fact checkers to use within their quiver to fight the speed and scale of mis and disinformation. And if they're available to everyone, that can be a problematic situation of weaponizing content or getting past content. But then you've got things like TINI. So InVid's one where you have to be registered to be involved and via AI. But then TINI is one where there's a lot of, I think, the kind of pre-bunking work where they're encouraging users to go and have a look at the technologies. Maybe that's all I want to say about that. But if you go to the next slide, just, one thing's clear. No one tool can rule them all. We need many and diverse tools in our set, because, as I said, tools break, and also, the awareness of the ethical considerations associated with these tools. So who you're sharing data with, how you're sharing data, and having local regionalised control seems pretty important. The need to educate a growing number of people about the limitations of automated verification tools. So in terms of pre-bunking, talking about false positives and how these tools can be used in problematic ways in terms of verification, I think is important. Tools die, tools need to be replaced. So having lots in your arsenal, I think, is important. And finally, I want to end on something from one of our fact checkers. The last slide is the use of automation, not just, thinking about automation, particularly in the visual sense, seeing this turn towards using it within fact checking in positive ways. So not just seeing AI as a problem, but thinking about it for really engaging audiences. And this is from one of our fact checkers from Mexico, who had this Museum of Lies, and they work with artists and fact checkers to put together this really engaging content. But chatbots, reporting systems, any mechanisms that can make, I guess, fact checking sexy, I think, is where we need to go.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Yeah, I think you answered already my next question. So I forgot to mention at the beginning of the session, but you will probably already familiar with the platform that we are using to collect questions, although I haven't seen any yet. But yeah, please go to slide.do, and then if you use the ADM+S 2023 or the QR code that you have here, and pose your question. We do have questions. I didn't refresh. Was the tool that didn't work? Yeah, but while we wait for others and the voting of the questions, I have a couple of questions to throw to you all. The first one I want to ask is the elephant in the room. No, so what is the role of fact checking in the context of generative AI? I used to say that we've been talking about how AI or information access tool assist fact checkers. I think now my slogan is like, now we need fact checkers to assist AI, because with all the hallucination that we can see in large language models, tools or other generative AI tools, I was wondering, like, how do you see changing the processes of fact checking and pre-banking in the context of generative AI? Any or all?
Those are very hard. All I would say is that in my limited experience with using AI tools in a fact-checking context, they have all been developed as a collaboration between practitioners and technologists. So I feel like there's a definite need for a close relationship between technologists and practitioners in the development of any tool. Just leave that there.
Yeah, and maybe making sure that you don't get those false positives, or you've thought about how they're being used. I think there's got to be a lot of work around how you would use these in a verification process beyond fact checking. And I also think the whole idea of making them easy to use. We talked with Denis who developed the Vera, and he said he's got the plugin. So it's a Chrome plugin. It's gone to many languages. It's really clear how you interpret that data. So I think having a really good interface and making it easy to use is going to be really important. And yeah, making sure that, the interpretation, I think, and they're doing a lot of work around that, I think.
There's just so much fact-checking information daily that, we just have this amazing repository. So we've got what we know now, and then it just needs to be agile so that it feeds into the AI. I mean, we already have a lot of automated tools anyway, fantastic chatbots and things like that, that you can sort of ring fence the information. But if you're thinking in terms of, we were sent a generative AI tool that someone had created to try out. And, first few questions I put in, I was like, oh, this is great. And then a couple of seconds later, I'd broken it because I was like, yeah, that's giving me all the wrong answers. It's just not, that's not up to date, because I know the question that I asked got updated, 3 days ago or something like that. Okay. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I also think that in terms of, Chrome extensions, things like that, I would love to see the collaborations working together so that we can have this, but it's got to be up to date.
Maybe I'll just come off the back of what Anne's just said. One of the really interesting things that came up recently in Seoul at the fact-checking conference, I think, was actually training not large language models, but small language models. And that we started to develop this understanding that actually, as being fact checkers for 10 years, we have this incredibly valuable corpus of verified data, which potentially, if someone was interested in, we could work around training models on. So that's
Okay, so there are a couple of interesting questions here, and we have, I think, 10 minutes or so to have questions. So let's try to cover them all. Amanda is interested to know more about the economic models driving disinformation. Yeah.
So I put up a whole bunch of tools. If you go back, you'll see some of the ones. They're quite limited. Anybody who's looked with the Facebook ads, and you would have been to hopefully the talk this morning about the ad observatory, that there's a lot we don't see. So trying to fill in those gaps. And I think that is one of the areas where some more work needs to be done about crowdsourcing what people see. I think that's really exciting. But some of the fact checkers we're working with, are working with those, I'll get the name of the actual area right, but working with some of these platforms, their advertising areas, to alert them to this content, because they don't even know that there's essentially some of these coordinated problems happening. The content just goes out, and it's only when you start putting it together. So yeah, I'll see if I've got anything more.
What's making all the production of disinformation? You said political interference, but what are the reasons that there's all this shit coming out?
Oh yeah, making money. I mean, we looked a lot at well, because you can advertise if you've got content that's going viral, so you're just attached to that content. So understanding what content's going out and what's being advertised on the back of that. Does that make sense?
And something that really worries me at the moment too is, this new kind of weaponization too, where you can, I've got to be really careful how I say this, but where you can say, oh, fund me, please fund me, because, help me with my cause that might be for nefarious reasons, okay? And they use emotion, and they use, this just getting everyone wound up, basically fund my cause. And usually it's related to some sort of ideology or, belief system. And it's all about, it keeps them, in a certain community where their profile just keeps growing and growing. They get more and more followers. Therefore, more followers means they'll have potentially more donors. And I'm just thinking, wow, they've got the business model down pat, but unfortunately it's to spread information that's not particularly helpful to push for a cohesive society, shall we say.
Thanks. Ned is asking, what strategic value can academic researchers bring to fact checkers and vice versa? Things related with that connection between researchers and academics and practitioners.
So I just want so much more empirical evidence and, like the relationships that have been set up with data experts, because we see what's going on, and we know, and, Twitter's a fantastic example at the moment where we're seeing misinformation and disinformation, but to be able to collect that properly and rigorously, in an academic way, so that if we're going to call out something is misinformation and disinformation, we have to be able to back ourselves up with the data. We can't just say, look, we do a lot of this, we see it. We've got to collect it. We've got to have that content analysis of it, and it's got to be just, really, rigorous, accurate. And that takes a lot of, it's human intensive labor as well.
I think an early experience working with academics that I had that was really beneficial for us was actually working with Damiano, who was looking at how do you deliver fact check content through audio only channels. And that actually brought to us a whole new awareness of something that we just didn't have time to think about. We didn't really have the kind of understanding of the technology to be engaging with that more deeply, but it actually set us on a course of kind of going investigating, okay, what are new technologies that are coming down the line? How is our content going to be used and delivered on those? So it's hugely beneficial for us.
I guess all I'll say is, it's nice to find out the broader picture of what's happening. So I think for us, and whenever we've had a conversation with somebody working in fact checking, and particularly talking about sharing experiences from other areas, who's got the time to be able to go and think about best practices or innovation? So making those connections, I think, between different fact checking organisations is one thing that I think, yeah, researchers can help with.
Danula's presentation reminded me too of just getting to know the different communities and what gets through as well. Like, you know, what sort of language, how do you present it so that, you know, and there's, you know, research being done that actually shows if you put it in this certain way, people are more likely to respond and take it in. And I just think that's so valuable, looking at the communities.
Yeah, following up on what Anne said, like there's also this other area of research that's really relevant and interesting, or sort of complementary to this, that is online interventions. Like what kind of interventions that you can introduce in online setup so that you can reduce the tendency for people to consume misinformation. And there was this very popular paper on Nature that was called Shifting Attention to Accuracy Could Reduce Misinformation. So the idea is that if you remind people to think about the accuracy of the post, then it can actually lead to a reduction in their sharing behavior, how they share misinformation. So I think the research on this kind of aspect is also really important and complementary to fact-checking research.
Thanks. All that is music to my ears, and I love music, because I think ADM+S is the perfect environment to do. So we actually can do that, no? So we have a few more years, and we have these connections with such a rich, diverse cohort of experts on different disciplines, all trying to understand the same problem and looking at different methodologies to tackle those problems. So I think, yeah, we definitely can do something to not solve everything, but shed light on some of the problems that you just raised. I think we have time for one more last question, and is so I'm a ranking person, so I need to follow the first one. So that with 7 votes, the highest voted question, let's see how it goes. How do you know when something is a fact, especially in an area where there is scientific discourse?
We've been spending a lot of time looking at COVID and scientific claim or scientific-based claims, and I think what we're seeing is a lot of explainer content more than are true or false. So I guess facts require some sort of scale verification, but nobody that we talked to wanted to have to come out and say what we said was wrong. I think fact checkers have been very happy during COVID to say, oh, listen, we didn't have all the story, you know, we've got more of the story now. But I think we're seeing a diversity of verification responses after COVID. That's one of the post-COVID things we're seeing, because scientific information is contingent. You know, when does something become a fact? Yeah, I don't know. You know, science is about the best possible evidence you've got at the time. So I don't know. And relying on expertise more than facts. I think that's what we learned during COVID, is talking with the experts and getting the best available information that we have. Yeah, different kind of content.
I think understanding the scientific method as well needs to be something that's brought into media literacy, because, you know, yeah, just the way that scientists will do their experiments and the rigor around that as well. And COVID was the perfect example. But for me, it was, so I was in Hong Kong during SARS, and I was working at CNN there, and I just had a baby and came back early from maternity leave, because I knew if I was in the newsroom, I'm going to get the information that can't necessarily go out in public yet, because we haven't sort of scrutinized it all yet. But I knew I'd sort of, yeah, get as close to the facts as I possibly could. And so I knew from back then that there had been a lot of study into coronavirus, and I couldn't understand why all of a sudden with COVID-19, everyone's saying, oh, we've got these vaccines and it's really new. How come they can rush it through? How can we, get a vaccine overnight? That sort of thing. It's because actually we've been studying and researching this for years and years and years. It was just that overnight, most people in this room have probably gone through ethics forms and things like that. And all of a sudden, all of those bridges came down, and it just made it a lot easier to fast track those processes. That's just one case study example of just understanding the scientific method anyway.
Yeah, thanks. It reminds me of Devi always corrected me when I used the term truthfulness, and she said, no, it's not truthfulness, it's veracity, because I like the International Fact-Checking Network, the code of principles that they have. And that's, I always refer to that to mention why you will never have the whole pipeline of fact-checking fully automated, because fully automatic. We're going to have cooperation. You need that because the machine cannot be disputed and say, well, who is going to be accountable of that? So there is always that process, as Michelle was saying, no? It's a live thing that can change over time. Thank you so much for your attention. Thanks for our panelists. I think it was a great session, and definitely we have more ideas to write those projects and keep collaborating in the next few years of the center. Thank you, everyone.